Good morning and happy Monday to everybody. This is the Monday of Holy Week. I hope everybody had a great weekend and was able to celebrate Palm Sunday. Today we're going to discuss Jesus and the temple because the Monday before he was crucified, he went to the temple. And the account of Mark, we can see that it was the last week of Jesus's earthly life. And in Mark, they say they came to Jerusalem. He went to the temple and began to throw out those buying and selling. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the chairs of those selling doves, and would not permit anyone to carry goods through the temple. He was teaching them, "It is not written, 'My house will be called a house of prayer for all nations,' but you have made it a den of thieves." Of course, the chief priests and the scribes heard this and started looking for a way to kill Jesus. They were mainly afraid of him because the whole crowd was completely astonished by his teachings. It goes on to say in Mark 11:19, whenever evening came, they would go out of the city. As Jesus arrived at the temple and entered it, he immediately confronted those that used the temple area for personal and financial gain. We can picture Jesus, a very weak, timid type of picture, but at the same time, Jesus is gentle and compassionate. He is always, I guess you would say, the holiness and the righteousness. We have to keep in mind that when Jesus walked into the temple, it was not an impulsive reaction. It wasn't just a temper tantrum that could be seen by somebody not getting their way. What Jesus did was a deliberate act. It was an intentional message to the people around him. He had seen the business and the activity of the temple the day before for Palm Sunday, and instead he went to sleep that night with the pictures of the marketplace and those religious people in his memory. It didn't suit him well, and therefore Jesus returned to the temple the next day to make an important point. His point was, you cash in on my people, and of course you got to answer to me at this point. We have to understand why this made Jesus so angry. And to do that, we have to look at the layout of the temple. The word temple can refer to the entire structure of the temple or even just certain parts of it. The area of the Jewish temple at the time of Jesus was huge, between 14 and 20 acres in size. That's way bigger than almost every church in town put together. And the largest part of the temple was the court of the Gentiles. It was the only part of the temples that the Gentiles were allowed to enter. And the next court was the court of women, which was far into the temple as the Jewish women were allowed to go. Then, of course, was the court of the Jews, or the court of Israel, which was as far as the Jewish men could go who were not Levitical priests. Next came the court of the priest, which is where the sacrifices were offered. And then inside of that court was the temple of proper, the actual temple building with the holy place and the most holy place. The rest of the temple was just walled courts and things of that nature. And I'm sure you could probably guess which part of the temple had been selling and the money changing going on. It was the court of the Gentiles. God had promised Abraham that through his offspring, all people would be blessed. Even before the church began, God had a place for the Gentiles in his temple. But this part of the temple that was supposed to be a house of prayer and worship had been instead turned into a marketplace. But it was the only space where the Gentiles could worship because they weren't allowed to go any place that were quieter or more worshipful courts. But now we have to question of why was there all this selling and money changing going on in the temple at all? If you recall, during the week of it was the Passover week, which highlighted in the Jewish calendar. People came from all over the world for this celebration. And upon the arrival, the Jewish people were obligated to meet two requirements. They had to sacrifice an animal, usually a dove, and the dove had to be perfect, without any type of blemish within itself. Or you could bring your own animal with you on the journey, but the odds were that the animal would end up being injured on the way or declared unacceptable. And with this, under disguise of keeping the sacrifice pure, the dove and lamb sellers in the temple just happened to have the acceptable animals for sale. This came at a much higher price. The second requirement was the temple tax that had to be paid, and it was due every single year. The temple tax had to be paid in, of course, the local currency. Knowing that many foreigners would be in Jerusalem to pay the tax, money changers conveniently set up tables and often exchanged the foreign money for a local currency, and this came at a fee. Of course it did. And it was not difficult to see why this would anger Jesus, causing him to enter the temple and overturn the tables of the money changers and the chairs of the ones that were selling the doves. God was seeking pilgrims that had journeyed for days and came to see him, to witness the holy and to worship. But before they were taken into the presence of God, they were pretty much taken to the cleaners. If anyone wants to anger God, then just get in the way of the people that wanted to follow him. And we have to remember what Jesus said in Mark 9:42. But whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to fall away, it would be better for him if a heavy millstone were hung around his neck and he were thrown into the sea. Another interesting thing that Mark mentioned, in addition to dealing with the sellers of doves and money changers, Mark said that Jesus would not permit anyone to carry goods through the temples. Earlier I mentioned that the temple grounds were as big as 20 acres in size, and the outer court of the temple provided the ideal shortcut from the eastern side of the city of Jerusalem into the western side of the city. Many people had developed the habit of using the temple as a shortcut as they went about their daily activities or daily lives. It's kind of like imagining people walking through an auditorium just to get from one area of the town to the other. It wouldn't be acceptable if they were in the middle of a game to walk through the auditorium. It was supposed to be a place of prayer for all nations, and instead it became a den of thieves and a place of distraction. And this really upset Jesus. So for those few minutes while Jesus was in charge, no buying or selling took place, and no one was allowed to cut through the area unless they were going in for worship. And if you could imagine, Jewish leaders did not know what to think. Mark tells us they started looking for a way to kill him. The sad but true fact is that religion is often used for profit, and when that happens, God's people are exploited and God is infuriated. If we look, we can consider a modern parallel. Imagine if you came into the church and there was all kinds of commerce going on in the foyer. Imagine that you were told that you're not allowed to wear the clothes that you had on into worship, but instead you had to buy or rent a special robe to put on over your clothes, which only the church had available. And if you wanted a songbook to sing from, they were also available for sale or rent. And what about those communion supplies? Well, you weren't allowed to bring yours from home, but we have some for sale. And if you'd like to make an offering, great, but you will have to exchange your normal currency for contribution currency, and the exchange rate is kind of heavy. Also, if you want to become a member of the church, you would have to turn in last year's tax return so the church can measure the giving account. And of course, if you're a visitor at this point, you'd pretty much walk away. Be like, no, that's not happening. And the people are robbing me of my religion. That would be right. And you would not want to go to church. Unfortunately, the religious output that had been practiced throughout human history, and sometimes it's still like that. They may be on television, radio, YouTube, even sometimes in the church pulpits, and sadly they prey upon and mutilate those who are easily deceived. At times, these people are governed by greed rather than God, and the fact that they emphasize their profit more than the prophet is one way to recognize them. To Titus, Paul wrote, "There are many rebellious people, full of empty talk and deception, especially from the circumcision party. It is necessary to silence them. They are ruining entire households by teaching what they shouldn't in order to get money dishonestly." From Titus 1:10 through 11. And to the Romans, Paul wrote, "Now I urge you, brothers and sisters, to watch out for those who create divisions and obstacles contrary to the teaching that you learned. Avoid them, because such people do not serve our Lord, but their own appetites. They deceive the hearts of the unsuspecting with smooth talk and flattering words." This was from Romans 16:17 through 18. If we look at their teachings as well, we kind of see a division. They tend to be ecclesiastical conmen who hold themselves up higher or better or deeper than those who are before them. And they present themselves as pioneers, the one and the onlys. They are kind of like medicine men. And they tell you to stay away from the pharmacies because they don't want you to try any other treatments. We have to understand that Jesus was trying to show people that the people trying to gain all of their money are in fact con men. That you didn't need all of that to be able to worship God. You needed love in your heart. You needed to be able to accept God into your heart. And Jesus wanted to take a stand for those people. And now is the time that we take a stand for ourselves and for, the Christian population and say that we cannot be deemed by these con men. We can't be overtaken, and we have to understand the righteousness of being able to worship without having ulterior motives. We also have to make sure that we are not the ones that are keeping others from seeing God or even serving God. We don't want to be the ones that are causing others to stumble and end up with the millstone tied around and at the bottom of the sea. Finally, let's be fruitful. We have to take the truth of God, even though we're not always ready for it. Sometimes that truth is harsh and hurts, but it's honest. It is the truth. And I pray that we are able to accept that truth and be able to stand up for what we know is right. Jesus stood up against the religious leaders, not because he had to, but because he felt obliged to stand up for the people, for God. At this point, he was enraged at the fact that people were not there to worship. Instead, they were there to gain money off of other people's obligations and sincerity of worshiping. We have to praise God through Jesus. We have everything we need for life and for godliness, so we can be faithful and fruitful. And if we really want to stay connected, this is the source that we have to go to. And that is our lesson for today. I hope that you guys are able to watch this and tune in tomorrow. Tomorrow we have another lesson for our Tuesday of Holy Week. If you guys have any questions, reach out. The church office is open, and hopefully I'll see you tomorrow.